In this episode of Global Warning, Russia suddenly loses access to Starlink. Could their saving grace be giant balloons? Two Iranian missiles get intercepted over Turkish airspace, raising the stakes of what could become a larger regional war. Iran has chosen a new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, and that decision may shut the door on negotiations for a foreseeable future. And finally, Hezbollah may be preparing for another round with Israel as the conflict surrounding Iran expands. Well, let's get into it.
As we know, there are known knowns. There are things we know we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know. But there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know, we don't know.
Global Warning with Ryan McBeth.
Welcome to Global Warning by Ryan McBeth. Here I offer a brief analysis of newsworthy events, developments, and trends that have been lost in the shuffle of those larger events dominating the news cycle. To start, Russia loses Starlink access. The Atlantic Council has reported the Russians are facing what is being termed a communications crisis of epic military proportions. About a month ago, the Russian military lost its access to Starlink. The news comes atop a whirlwind of reports coming from Ukraine. Ukraine appears to be regaining ground in their efforts to push back Russian territorial gains. Even the Moscow Times, one of the few independent Russian-owned news agencies still around, has reported on the dire communications fiasco. Reporters at the Moscow Times found that Russian military units have become over-reliant on Starlink technology and access, leading to serious problems in Russia's ability to coordinate defenses against Ukrainian attacks once the access to Starlink was blocked. The implications for Russia's loss of Starlink access cannot be overstated here. Russian military units, and more importantly, Russian commanders, were wholly reliant on Starlink access for coordinating attacks and defenses, calling in artillery strikes, and moving drone assets around Ukraine. With the loss of Starlink, Ukrainians have reversed some Russian territorial gains. While it's important to exercise caution here, it shows that the war in Ukraine is an ongoing and ever-evolving event that will continue to surprise us. Russia is likely to replace their Starlink technologies with something domestically produced, so while access has been terminated now, it's not likely to stay that way. In fact, Russians are looking to launch massive aerostats, or tethered balloons with 5G equipment attached over Ukraine. While it is hard to think of this as a real replacement for Starlink, it does show the Russians are looking to solve a very real problem facing their troops and commanders in the field. And this won't be cheap. Helium costs anywhere between $25 to $50 a liter, and it takes 1,000 kilograms of helium, or 1 cubic meter, to lift 1 kilogram of mass. The bigger problem is that helium atoms are so small, they slowly escape from the balloon, what we call an envelope in the aerostat business. Yes, I've worked on these before. So, you'll always have helium loss over time, meaning that balloons will periodically need to be lowered for recharging, and this could occasionally degrade coverage. It is a less expensive option than a satellite by several orders of magnitude, but it's still a costly effort, especially if this is multiplied across the front and replacements must be found for combat losses. According to a recent New York Times article, an estimated 1/2 of the Russian Federation's federal budget goes to the war effort and the Russian military. To use an old adage here, Russia is robbing Peter to pay Paul in the hopes of annexing Ukraine or even turning Ukraine into a client state, all while weathering what elites like Putin believe to be short-term economic pains. The loss of Starlink also shows a growing tension between the United States and Russia. The Russians have been reluctant to come to the negotiating table. The loss of Starlink, along with Ukrainian gains on the ground, are part of a larger effort to squeeze the Russians and bring them back to the table. Next up, NATO intercepts Iranian missiles. Yes, you heard that right, NATO. At least 2 Iranian missiles have been intercepted over Turkish airspace, as reported by Al Jazeera and Reuters. The Iran war, as some are now calling it, has the potential to turn into a regional conflict, and it appears that the Iranians want it that way. Iranian missiles have been pictured hitting civilian and military targets throughout the region as Iran attempts to dissuade regional actors from joining in on America and Israel's behalf against their country. And Iran's actions could lead to a number of potential outcomes. On one hand, Iran risks escalating the conflict into that regional conflict. In this scenario, Iran becomes a target of its neighbors and adversaries in the region. Now, I don't find this likely. I actually don't particularly like the term regional war, since most Middle Eastern air forces in the country have very limited deep precision strike capability. On the other hand, this could be Iran's way to dissuade others from joining the fray. It's like this. If Iran is throwing punches, they're kind of hoping to convince others not to join this little war Israel and the United States have. If you do, there'll be consequences. Intimidation tactics are pretty hard to ignore. Now, the level of mass available to Iran to execute these strikes is falling every day, so their chances of dissuading others may be slipping. Next, the Ayatollah's successor. Mojtaba Khamenei, the son of late Ali Khamenei, has been appointed the new supreme leader of Iran. While the choice of Mojtaba comes as no surprise to most observers, it does throw a cold bucket of water on plans that moderates or reformers might take power, who in turn might be willing to negotiate with the U.S. With the hardliner in the commander's chair, it's really hard to know what Iran might do next. Mojtaba is part of a generation of Iranians that you could consider true believers who were molded during the Iran-Iraq War. Mojtaba joined the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps in 1987 and served in the war, although not much is known about his combat experience. Even with a new leader, Iran seems to be running out of friends. It is unlikely that China will come to Iran's aid, and they haven't really done much since Israeli and American bombing began. The Russians may be giving intelligence to the Iranians, but this appears more as a way for the Russians to score some cheap victories against American troops rather than anything deeper or strategic. It's also likely that Iran's OODA loop, or Observe, Orient, Decide Act, has slowed dramatically due to degraded command and control. If that's the case, their decision cycle may be so delayed that they can't act on Russian intelligence even when they receive it. As Iran continues lobbing missiles and drones in different directions, it is unlikely that Iran will come to the negotiating table as long as Mojtaba stays in power. And for Iran, victory means the regime stays in power. For the United States, Israel, and others who are involved, things are a lot more complicated. And these complications are growing in number as operations continue over Iranian skies. Finally, Hezbollah versus Israel, round 2. In 2024, the Israelis directed a limited military campaign against Hezbollah, which is a Shia militant group originally founded in the early 1980s in Lebanon and later supported by Iran. With Israeli and American attacks on Iran, Hezbollah has likely been asked or encouraged to attack Israel in retaliation. However, Hezbollah has seen better days. With its capabilities worn down and the loss of Iranian supply routes through Syria, Hezbollah fights with less. In theory, Hezbollah is an independent group which aligns itself with Iran. Nevertheless, the link between the two will be tested during this war, as Hezbollah could be faced with its own existential threat of annihilation. Hezbollah is likely to continue conducting attacks on Israel as long as it supports its strategic needs. However, it's hard to say if round 2 of this Hezbollah versus Israel fight will produce very much. It's possible that Israel takes these provocations by Hezbollah very differently than the past. Hezbollah has proven itself to be resilient in its efforts to fight Israel and its own interests. The United States and even Israel will need to walk a fine line here to prevent a broad regional war, there's that term again, from dragging both countries into a conflict they hope to avoid. Thank you for listening. New episodes appear weekly at ryanmcbeth.substack.com, where you can also find the companion intelligence briefing. Sources are cited using footnotes and active links to ensure transparency and replication.